Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Between Two Consultants. My name is Nicholas Kelly.
And I am Ethan Silvers.
And today we're going to be talking about microservices, and we're very fortunate to have Ilya and Ben with us today. And I will just quickly ask Ilya if you could do a very short intro followed by Ben, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, nice to meet you, or glad to be here. Ilya Tsapin, I'm architect. I'm leader of the architecture practice, and I spent in Logic, I think, the past 5 years. It was a fortunate, great time. Ben?
Yeah, and I'm Benjamin Cayley. I'm also an architect with the architecture practice here at Logic 2020. I've been here for a number of years. I come from a developer background, so I have all the technical background and lots of industry experience. And then, I have very much enjoyed my time here in consulting over the past few years with Logic.
And we are very excited to have both of you on, Ilya and Ben. Like, quite honestly, in terms of all of the guests that we've had, and we've had dozens and dozens of dozens, you guys are definitely on the list of folks who have been on our show. Let's start with, we'll be talking about microservices maturity. And it's been something that's really been creeping up a lot over the last several years. And so we're fortunate to have both of you on who are experts in microservices. And let's just start, I'll throw it over to Ilya. What is microservices?
Well, backing up, what is not microservice, right? If you have an application that has a lot of complexity built in it and serves multiple of use cases at once, the data flows in multiple directions and it's hard to troubleshoot because of that. That is not a microservice. So coming to opposite of that, because the applications are getting more and more complex, it became unbearable basically to handle that with dev teams. Think about like 10 years ago, you had application with this message bus and components of the application was trying to communicate through that thing, but also were trying to talk to each other through backend systems. It was a nightmare. So the concept of microservice is pretty simple. It's an isolated application. It means that it can be deployed separately from anything else. It serves its own use case, and this use case should be very narrow because otherwise you're just building up a small thing which becomes larger and larger and larger, and all of a sudden it's not a microservice application. It has its own rules, how you treat logs and all that stuff, all that components. In ideal situation, microservice should have an isolated data layer as well. So again, this is a chunk of code, a small application dedicated to a specific purpose, which can be deployed separately from anything else. Ben, please chime in if you have a different view.
Yeah, no, and I think just to add on to that, there's not a size that defines a microservice either. It's about, like Ilya said, it's about a single purposed task, something accomplishing a specific thing, and not coupling that with many different use cases, but just an individual use case. So that might be just a few lines of code. It might be a whole application built around one single use case, but the idea is it's an isolated thing that can be deployed by itself. Right?
Can we just go a little bit further? And by the way, Ben and Ilya, thanks for that. It's first time on this show Between Two Consultants, and you guys are absolutely killing it. Nick, would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. Definitely in our top 10.
Yeah.
Of guests.
Top 10?
I
Not top 2.
I was going to say top 15, but that works. In terms of like when you're like real world benefits, so you use microservices and now it's out in the wild and you've re-architected. What are now the benefits that the business and the technology team is going to see by having microservices out there?
Well, first of all, it's easier to develop because, again, it's an isolated thing. So from a development standpoint, you can split the work in your dev team, assigning a dedicated microservice to dedicated members of the team, and they work in this small on this small scope. Also, it's much easier to troubleshoot because once you have these microservices in place, you know how they interact with each other. So you can look at the logs, you can do tracing and all that stuff. It is much easier for you to understand and isolate the problem if you have like a production issue or anything like that. And also it helps you with these things like Blue-green deployments or Canary deployments, where you upgrade not the whole your code of your whole application, but only the part of the code that's been upgraded. For example, I have a feature and I can deploy a new version of that microservice. It doesn't affect anything else, but it allows you to test your use case with the live data from production without impacting anything else. This is very valuable. Like having production data for testing, this is what every developer is dreaming of, because otherwise you just test against some mock data, which is fine in theory, but in practice you might miss a lot of use cases, which then you will be fixing it when that will manifest in production.
Ilya, a few times you've mentioned use cases, and I want to throw this one over to Ben then. Could you give us an example of a use case that we could relate to?
Yeah, so even something as simple as like converting pounds to kilograms. If you're working on like an international billing system and you need to make sales on on a pound by pound basis, well, that conversion needs to happen to have an international audience. So for instance, you might need to take a price that's hundreds of thousands of dollars and you're doing it by pound. Well, you don't want to lose the precision of that calculation. So you need to have a dedicated module that's doing that calculation and giving you the correct prices for whatever the division might be or the multiplication to get back and forth between pounds and kilograms. And that one use case could be its own service, right? Its own microservice. And think about it from a developer perspective. If you open up that code base, you're looking at a thing that does one thing, right? And when you talk about risk, and Ilya was talking about deployments, the risk of redeploying that one thing by itself is much smaller than trying to retest the whole sales application around it, because you know that you're isolated already. You only have to test that one thing. The risk goes way down.
Awesome.
Ben,
yeah, thank you.
And to add what Ben just said, to what just Ben said, in this example, you have a very defined set of inputs and outputs, right? You take kilograms and price as an input, for example, or like pounds and price as an input. Then your output is the price and kilograms, right? So it is very defined, and because of that, it is very easy to test because you can do all your regression testing, all your performance testing on that specific feature. For example, if I deploy this microservice solely, I can set up a stand for performance testing and hit it with like 1 million requests per second and see how it will behave separately from anything else. So I will check that this microservice is working as expected in stressed environment.
Awesome.
Two questions for, I'm sorry, Nick.
Ethan, let me jump in there because
no, you wouldn't mind. I
mind. Ethan, I mind a lot.
So, okay, so just as I was saying, all right.
As someone with deep expertise in microservices, do you think a microservice for counting the number of episodes we have would be maybe too much? It might be too much for a microservice to handle.
I think that's
think about this.
When there's only 3 episodes, over engineering is a real problem.
Nick, who invited these guys on? Courtney. We have a lot to talk about after the show. Our media manager and producer, Courtney. Oh, unbelievable.
And one more thing to add to this, guys. we didn't talk about communication between microservices, right? And yeah, that deserves its own episode. It could be a RESTful API, it could be peer-to-peer connection. There is a lot of components how that could be done. We very much like pub/sub queue options, that as well. For example, in our projects for Microsoft, we set up a set of microservices that communicate through each other through this queue. And because of that, it is so scalable, it doesn't really matter for us how many requests or users are there in the system, as long as Azure will provide us enough infrastructure. That's all.
And Ilya, you started that off with a full other episode could be on how microservices communicate. It's awkward that you bring up us having you guys on the show again, but that's something that we can certainly discuss. The other thing that we should have a whole episode on in terms of communications is how Nick should defer to me when questions are being asked. It's clearly a miss on our part. Courtney, that'll go into his PIP, his performance improvement plan. So we're on a 90-day track. We talked about that on the last episode.
I'm sure that will reflect favorably on me in the PIP, actually. The less you get to talk, the better for everyone.
Let's talk about best practices. Ilya and Ben, are there a few best practices that we want to consider as we're building out a microservices architecture?
Let me start by calling out the book. So we have this book, which I think like every developer, literally every developer must have. It is called 12-Factor App. And this is, it's very short. It's like 25 pages max. But it depicts all the principles how application must be developed, including microservices as well. I will name top 3 of them, which will like come to my mind every time. First, each microservice should have its own repository. People tend to put a lot of microservices in the same repository because they think they want to reuse the code here and there. This is not the best practice. The best practice, each microservice in a separate repository. If you want to reuse your code, you're welcome to have shared libraries, this kind of stuff. That's a different thing. The reason for that, you want to be able to deploy the whole microservice without interaction with anything else. Okay, so this is number one. Second principle, you should consider your logging to be a detached thing. So you should shoot your logs to Splunk or Datadog, wherever, as a stream, and you should be able to look at the logs there. And even if your application is down, is not working, whatever, you already have this record of the logs. You can go through and see what has happened there. And third, which is more debatable, but certainly appreciated, each microservice has its own data structure. You do not share your data with any other microservices. There are schools which consider that the data layer could be shared between them. My personal opinion, this is not optimal because you introduce complexity and you violate the microservices principles. But this is my personal opinion.
Ben, would you like to disagree with anything that Ilya just said?
No, I think really, I think one thing that, you know, above and beyond the 12-factor application development stuff is there's also a shift when a company starts adopting microservices, and it's more at a culture level and at a business level. So, you know, part of the best practices, not only on the tech side, but also on the business side, of educating all the different stakeholders on what microservices are and how they can be scaled out and leveraged by the business. Because, I mean, think about it in the long term. Like, what if you've got this swarm of microservices that are all doing all these different things? What if you need that you know, kilogram to pound conversion thing on 5 different applications? Well, now you don't have to write it 5 times. You already have one microservice that does that. But you need a way to have the business understand that now you've got all these features, all these functions out there, and they don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. They can start building and having momentum gathering on all the features that they've already built. So if you can bring the business along with the development and the technical teams, then you can actually make some really interesting changes. And we've seen that with some of our clients as well.
Yeah, and then like I've always like to bring the use case to the edge. So in this example, like if you have one microservice, it's fine. 10 is fine. But how you would handle 2000? How you would handle 10,000 microservices? That's a really interesting story. And also how you would move a monolithic application, which is like big, giant piece of code, to the microservice pattern. We'll talk about in our next episodes, I guess.
Next episode. Maybe you guys just want to host it from now on.
I enjoy your company.
Nick, unfortunately, we're running out of time. This has been one of definitely one like of all the episodes. This has been one of the enjoyable ones. Although, like quite honestly, all of them are quite enjoyable. Nick, just like before we sign off, would you agree with this statement that Ilya and Ben, everything that they've known, they basically learned from us?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair. And obviously, a lot of the content of the 12-factor book got its inspiration from the show. So it's good to see it come full circle.
Nick, anything else before we sign off?
No, this has been great. Thank you both, gents. It's been a pleasure and always good to learn new things.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for watching another episode of Between Two Consultants. I'm Ethan Silvers.
I'm Nick Kelly.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.